There we go. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm just watching the populating list here grow, just letting everybody get into the meeting before we get started. I think we're good. So hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. Today's webinar will focus on changes to drug pricing regulations in Canada. My name is Kimberly Brunel, and I am the Ontario Regional Support Liaison for AMAC. If you don't know who we are, AMAC is a leading funder of research into bone marrow failure diseases in Canada. Our organization supports patients and caregivers across the country who are living with aplastic anemia, myelodysplastic syndrome, and PNH. I am so very pleased today to be joined by Barry Katsof. Barry is the founder and president of the Canadian Association of PNH Patients. I will let him introduce himself a little bit more in a few minutes. For today's session, you'll notice that you're all muted. You can hear myself and you'll hear Barry in just a few moments. If you have any questions along the way, there are two ways that you can do that. One, if you want to verbally ask your question to Barry, I can unmute you at one point. So if you can just hit, there's a little hand, raise your hand button next to your name. You can hit that at any time, and then I can stop the presentation, unmute you, and you can ask your question. Alternatively, you can type your question into the chat or question box at any time throughout the presentation, and we'll make sure we cover it before we wrap up. I just want to remind you that today's session will be recorded. So if you missed something, don't worry about it. The slides and Barry's talk will be available after the session is over. So without further ado, Barry, I'll pass it over to you. That rhymed.
Thank you, Kimberly. Welcome, everybody. We're going to try and clarify to as many of you, or all of you, hopefully, what's going on in terms of drug pricing and the new regulations that the government's proposing to enact here in Canada. We're going to talk about the access to DRDs, which is drugs for rare diseases, and COVID vaccines. Some of the background to the PMPRB and the proposed changes. Health Canada's drugs for rare disease consultation process. What the perceived impact of the changes to the PMPRB are going to have on rare disease patients. We'll show you how we can hopefully make a change in what we've done so far, and then how we can help you get your voices heard. As Kimberly said, I'm the founder and president of the Canadian Association of PNH Patients. And I live every day with the same issues that most of you listening in today live with, as I am a PNH patient and have been so since 2001. So that's 20 years I'm living with the disease. I'm doing well, thank you. And but I understand what each and every one of you are going through. Aside from being involved in the Canadian Association of PNH Patients, I got involved internationally and am one of the founders. I'm on the executive and on the board of the Global Alliance of PNH Patients, This is a group of patient organizations around the world. Currently, we have here in Canada, the P&H patient groups involved in the US, the UK, Germany, France, the Netherlands, Italy, Spain, and hopefully soon to join Japan as well. So collectively, we have a pretty loud voice, and we're at the center of all the R&D and what's happening to make the lives of P&H patients more palatable and give them a quality of life that they haven't been able to experience before. Access to DRDs. You're going to hear a lot of what I call the alphabet soup of letters today, and I'll try and explain what they are. DRDs are drugs for rare diseases and COVID vaccines, and how the two really relate to each other. This year, or the past 15 months, is or has been unprecedented. We're all experiencing the anguish of COVID. When are we getting vaccinated? Are we getting vaccinated? And so on. While there's all the downsides of COVID, there is a silver lining, at least from my perspective, and that is COVID has brought to the forefront the issue that patients with rare diseases have been grappling with for years. And that is the lack of access to drugs, because pharmaceutical companies aren't doing research here in Canada. They're not manufacturing here in Canada. And as a result, Canadians are on the average waiting 3+ years after a new drug is introduced in other jurisdictions around the world. So COVID has brought that issue to the forefront. I guess that's one and probably the only silver lining to COVID, is that now when you mention to your loved ones, your caregivers, your friends, that you just don't have access to that innovative new drug that's helping so many other patients in the US or in Europe, you get some sympathy, you get some compassion. But now, hopefully, more Canadians will understand what we rare disease patients are going through on a daily basis. Because let's face it, Canada has not been pharma friendly. They have beaten the pharmaceutical companies over the head to the point that factories have been closed. R&D is not as vibrant that it used to be. I live in Montreal, and if you go on Highway 15 north of the city, or if you go on Highway 20 west towards Ontario, you see building after building, campus after campus that have just been abandoned by these pharmaceutical companies. And that's hurting patients with rare diseases, because we're just not getting access to these new drugs because none of the R&D is being done here in the country. Let me see. Okay. We're going to talk a little bit about the PMPRB. And what's this alphabet of letters mean? PMPRB stands for the Patent Medicine Price Review Board. That's what they call this regulatory body that regulates prices. Before we go into that, though, I'd like to just give you an overview of the drug approval and funding process in Canada. If you look at the, I guess, the far left-hand side of the screen, it has the idea. This is the pharmaceutical company, the researcher, whether it's in the pharmaceutical company's lab or in a university lab somewhere, to come up with an idea of a drug that may help a certain disease. They do preclinical studies, i.e., what's that mean? Once they have this drug in quasi-formulation, they'll try it out on animals, mice, rats, whatever, to make sure it's not toxic and that the animals don't die from it. Once they have a comfort level that the drug is relatively safe, they'll put it out into clinical trials. These clinical trials go from phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and they take years to go through the process, because for every person that's on the trial for 1 year, it's 1 man year. So if you have 100 patients on clinical trials for drug A for 1 year, you now have 100 man years of data. That's how it kind of works. So once it gets into phase 2 of clinical trials, they have a fairly good comfort level what type of adverse effects they can expect and whether it's really safe or not. And then they go into phase 3. Once they're in phase 3 and they really have a good comfort level, Health Canada will maybe allow the drug in on a special application program in very specific cases that are presented to them by the doctors who are treating a certain patient. Then you get a notice of compliance. Then you get the drug availability. Then it goes through the HTA, or the health technology assessment. Now look at the timeline. You have the research, which could be years. Okay, the regulatory review is easy 12 plus months. The HTA is also 12 plus months. And then the HTA is at the federal level, and Quebec has their own process, which is called an S. So you're getting double analysis of the effectiveness of the drug. And then you go into the reimbursement process, which can take up to 3 years. And I know AMAC was in discussions with a pharmaceutical company on a new drug that's being introduced elsewhere in the world. And they said maybe 2023. That's almost 2 years away from now. And that's if everything goes smoothly. So you're looking at probably 5+ years from idea until it gets into a position where the doctors can prescribe the drug to their patients. It's a long time waiting. And part of the problem is Canada doesn't have a policy for drugs for rare diseases, whereas many other countries do. And as a result, this process, once you get into the HTA and the reimbursement side of things of the graph, happens much more quickly than it does here in Canada. In some countries, it could take months, whereas here it could take years. So when it comes to that, our process is very cumbersome and very, very costly. When they say that it can cost upwards of a couple of billion, that's with a B, dollars, to bring a drug from idea stage to patient care, it's very feasible when you look at all the people involved, all the legal costs, all the forms, all the processes, regulatory that goes into getting a drug approved here in Canada. PMPRB 101. What's it all about? Here in Canada, once a drug is developed, as in most parts of the world, the government will grant a patent to the pharmaceutical company or to the university that has developed the drug, which protects the drug from somebody copying the drug. So they have, I think it's 15 or 17 years of protection, i.e. nobody can copy it. Yes, generics or quasi-copy drugs can come out, but the molecules are not the same and they're altered slightly so that they're not copying the patent completely. The mandate of the PMPRB is to ensure that patent medicines are not excessive. Sit back and think. What is your determination of what excessive means? I don't know how many people are on this webinar, but I'm sure that we could probably, if there's 15 or 20 people joining us here today, we probably have 30 to 40 different meanings of excessive. It's a very vague, undefined term. But this PMPRB regulatory board can determine what excessive is. I don't think it's really fair, but that's how the system works. In 2019, the annual report of the PMPRB found that Canadian prices were the fourth highest among 7 comparative countries. So one of the ways of figuring out if the drug is excessive is, we call it the basket of 7. You have to excuse me, my screen just went dead.
Do you think you can open it again, Barry?
I'm going to try.
Okay. If not, I'm here on backup.
Yeah. We're working on it. Okay.
Okay.
Just take a second or two. We have the basket of 7. My screen's not opening and I'm ad-libbing. So excuse me. Here we go. Okay. We've got the basket of 7. What this means is we have Italy, France, Sweden, the UK, Germany, Switzerland, and the US. They all take the price of Solaris, which most of the people on this call are familiar with, and they average the price. So when I said earlier that Canada was in the median of the prices for other countries, the average price in these 7 countries is what the aim is to have Canada sell the drug for. And in no way can Canada's price be higher than the highest in that basket. So that's what they call the pharmacoeconomic health technology assessment. They look at, what the value is for what you're getting, how much you're paying for what you're getting. Some of the changes that they're doing very sneakily is that they're removing 2 countries. They're removing the 2 highest cost countries. They're removing Switzerland and the US. So now we have 5 countries, and they're repopulating it with 7 additional countries. So now you have a basket of 12, except they're populating it with all lower priced countries. So in effect, the estimation or the projection is, by doing this, the highest price allowed for a drug to sell in Canada will be depressed by roughly 25%. Canada is strictly focused on regulating revenues from pharmaceutical companies. They really don't care what benefit is to a patient. They're not interested in a patient's quality of life improvement. They only are interested in dollars and cents. Not very fair, but welcome to Canada.
Barry, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
Do you think you could make the screen of the slides a little bit bigger? We're just seeing more of your backgrounds.
Okay.
Sorry, I don't want to mess you up either.
How's that?
There we go. Perfect. Done.
Okay. I know a little bit about PMPRB, but not as much about technology. So
You're doing great.
okay. Let me get to the slide that we were on. Okay. So the PMPRB was established by the Patent Act in 1987. It's a federal pharmaceutical patent policy. And this came even before CADTH and NS and the PCPA, which is the Pan-Canadian Pricing Alliance. It's an independent regulator. It's not a payer. They don't pay for anything. They just tell the payers what they're allowed to pay. Kind of not fair. It's like they have no skin in the game, if you want to call it that. They have the right, though, to sue a pharmaceutical company, and it only churns more money for the lawyers and the process that they go through. I've been involved in testifying for a pharmaceutical company in one of these hearings, and welcome to Banana Republic, Canada. It's pretty scary because this board actually has in their mandate that they can move the goalposts in the middle of the game. Pharmaceutical companies can follow all the rules and regulations. And if any province or any individual group makes a complaint to the PMPRB, and if they side with the person or the individual group making the complaint, they can change the rules in the middle of the game. Not really very fair. But the ironic thing about it is that the PMPRB, the way it's been set up, has really been a benefit to Canadians. So we have to question, why are they looking now to make it even more onerous for Canadian patients to get access to new drugs? Our current guidelines are based on therapeutic comparisons with the most costly drug that treats the same disease in other countries. Our international price comparisons are used with breakthrough drugs, which are limited to the median of the PMPRB 7, the basket of 7. So the average of the basket of 7. Over time, the prices in Canada are limited to increases in the CPI, or the Consumer Price Index, how much tomatoes go up every year, and so on. Okay. The Canadian price over the years has never exceeded the highest foreign price. And in principle, Canadian prices on average should never exceed the median of the PMPRB 7. The new guidelines, and I'll just quickly go through this. As I said earlier, they've removed the higher priced higher priced countries, namely the US and Switzerland, and they added 7 lower priced countries. And the estimate is that will drive down from the basket of 7 to the basket of 12. That's going to drive down prices probably around 25%. Some of the economic pricing factors, they go through the pharma economics. How much value are you getting for the drug? You know, they look at the price. You know, they don't value quality of life all that much unless it's actually life-saving and proven that. But again, it's not a clearly scientifically defined measurement. They look at the size of the market. They look at your GDP. They're saying that in Canada, the GDP is $70 some odd thousand, I think. And they're saying that the highest price of a drug can't be more than a multiple of GDP. Well, I think they're looking at 150%. So you're looking at 100 and some odd $1,000 for the highest price of a drug. That's what they're trying to do. One of the things that was challenged in the courts, and the pharmaceutical industry were on the winning side of that challenge, is that the pharma companies tend to give heavy discounts to the payers. But these discounts are very, very confidential. And the PMPRB wanted to remove that ability to keep the prices confidential, and the courts struck that down. So that was a winning thing for the pharma industry, in that everybody pays a different price, as crazy as it may seem. So will the PMPRB reforms improve access by improving affordability? I don't think so. Will it reduce access by creating barriers to bring the drugs to Canada? I think most definitely. Because if the pharma companies aren't going to make a profit and pay for their billions of dollars of expenditures on R&D, and you have to understand, when they invest in a new drug, they don't know if it's going to be a winner or a failure. So they're taking the risk. And if they don't make the profit, they're not going to be willing to take the risk. And the higher the risk is to get a return on their investment in Canada, they're going to look elsewhere. All we have to do is read the newspaper today to see what's happening with the supply of vaccines here in Canada. Canada is at the bottom of the list. Ask yourself the question, why? It's not because we're paying the highest price. It's because the drug companies are going to the countries that are supporting them. The UK has supply. The US has supply. Europe has supply. Canada, we're begging for supply. That's what's going to continue to happen in drugs for rare diseases as we go forward. As I said earlier, the PMPRB is not really that broken. So you have to question why they're trying to fix it. And my analysis, and it's not scientific, it's just thoughts of many people in the know, and I happen to agree with it, that this is all very political. We're going to lower drug prices. Makes great headline news. The sad part is nobody reads the fine print, and those that do don't fully understand the ramifications of lowering drug prices. And some of those ramifications, as we explained earlier, are we're just not going to get access to the new and innovative drugs, period. We're going to be at the end of the road. We're going to be at the end of the line. Why is it that Canada is vaccinating first dose and second dose 4+ months later, when the drug companies are saying 3 to 4 weeks after the first dose? That's because we don't have enough supply, and we haven't secured supply because we're not on the most favored client list. It's business 101. And if the regulations that are being talked about go into place, things are going to get worse. So I really question why the PMPRB is making the changes. As I started to say earlier, it's politics. Lowering drug prices, everybody likes to read that. They don't understand the consequences, but it generates votes, or at least the government hopes that it will generate votes, because politicians only care about one thing: votes and staying in power. Plain and simple. Just as and I'll show you later in the position paper that the government put out on excessive or high prices for drugs for rare diseases, they only talk about high price. They don't talk about quality of life and all the other ramifications. So, in the last 25 years here in Canada, prices have never increased more than the consumer price index, which is good. Canadian prices are 20% below the average foreign prices. And there have been 110 plus voluntary compliance undertaken by the pharma company to lower prices here in Canada. So why fix something that's not broken? I mean, the PMPRB says, the high cost of innovative drugs put pressure on drug budgets. That's not really so, because all the numbers say, and no one's disputing it, even the PMPRB, is that the total budget for drugs for rare diseases is 2.5% of the overall pharmacare budget in Canada. 2.5%. In accounting terms, it's almost immaterial. Why are they focusing in on 2.5%? If you cut it in half, you're only cutting out 1.25%. I would look at an area that's taking up 7, 8, or 10% of the budget and see if you can reduce that by half. How much are the savings going to be by reducing 2.5% by 1.5%? Not all that much. Canadian prices overall are higher than most OECD countries, such as Australia and New Zealand. Well, hey, all of us that are on Solaris is still not approved in New Zealand because they don't want to pay for it. So, they're comparing it to countries that don't pay for drugs anyway. It's really not a good comparison. They're saying that patentees, the drug companies, have not lived up to their 10% R&D. Well, depends on how you do the calculation and who's doing it. So it's really hard to say. They report that Canada is the 4th highest drug expenditures per capita in 2017. That's also debatable. You can play with the numbers any which way you want. The bottom line is that drugs for rare diseases are not going to be readily available here. And I'll give you some examples as we move on in the presentation. Major changes since 1987 are cost containment measures by the public drug plans. There have been price freezes, mandatory generic substitution, reference-based pricing policies, listing agreements, risk sharing. CADIT and INES in Quebec, they have some of the most rigorous clinical and cost-effective reviews. PCPA, this is an interesting fact. PCPA stands for the Pan-Canadian Pricing Alliance. Now, here in Canada, Health Canada and all the federal regulatory bodies approve a drug and they set the maximum price. Then they say to the provinces, okay, we've approved it, now you pay for it. It's very nice of them. They're setting the price, but then they're making the provinces pay for the drugs. What's been happening until 2011 is that the pharmaceutical companies had to go to each province and territory and negotiate 10 times, and then I think there's 3 territories in Canada, 13 times individual agreements. And what happened was that Ontario may have paid a better price than Quebec, and Quebec may have paid a better price than Newfoundland, and so on. The Pan-Canadian Pricing Alliance is a group of all the provinces getting together and, in theory, beating up on the drug companies with a bigger baseball bat. Now all the provinces and territories will get the same price because the pharmaceutical company is dealing with a negotiating body that's negotiating for the whole country, as opposed to each individual province negotiating on their own. A little bit of history and something that we can be very proud of, that Solaris was the first drug to go through the PCPA process back in the spring, summer of 2011. So we're very familiar with that process. We were the first drug that the PCPA enacted on and set the prices for all of Canada. They're claiming, and I have no reason to refute it, that through that process, that they're able to save roughly 30% of drug costs, or over $2 billion annually. And they were able to not list about 30% of new drugs because of insufficient benefit, which is, if the drug's not going to provide benefit, why pay for it? Or why give it to a patient if they're not going to get any benefit from it? And as a result, as I said earlier, what's the relevance of the PCPA, PMPRB? Why are they doing these reforms? There's an adage in business: if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So I really have to question that. Why are we so concerned with these new changes? They're just going to make the process more complicated and longer and more costly, creates uncertainty prior to launching and ongoing. The staff, as I said earlier, has very broad discretion to do what they want, when they want, and how they want. It's really, they can move the goalposts in the middle of the game, and it's really quite scary. There's going to be increased litigation. It's already happening. We've seen it. I've been part of it. It's very costly, very time consuming, and just delays getting new drugs to patients. And the government's focus is on controlling the pharma companies' revenues and not on patients. As I said, in the brief or document they put out on excessive prices or high cost of drugs for rare diseases, they're focused on price. They're not focused on quality of life for patients, which really isn't fair. So Health Canada, Drugs for Rare Diseases, the national study, Consultation. I have this here. If you can see it, you can't see the fine print, but it's 12 pages long. And in this document, they mention high costs for drugs for rare diseases no less than 60 times in a 12-page document. No less than 60 times did they mention high costs for drugs for rare diseases. Quality of life for patients, they mention 2 times. 60 to 2. If that doesn't tell you what the government is focused on, nothing will. Canadians were invited to submit their perspective on the paper, and you better believe that patient organizations did. Some were invited to attend some of the 6 public forums, of which I was a participant in one of. Our voices have to be heard, okay? Aside from making a submission to that high cost for drugs for rare diseases, we're part of a coalition, Protect Our Access, and more on that later, made a submission to the government as well. If we don't stand up and be heard, they're going to do what they want to do. And remember what I said earlier, the politicians care only about votes. They don't care about patients. If they see there's a chance that they're going to lose members of parliament in certain constituencies, they may change their mind and do something else. The consultation is biased. It's just, you know, from the outset, the title, high cost for drugs for rare disease, is clearly slanted one way, okay? It's inferring that patients and caregivers are somewhat slowly to blame for having a disease that is not, you know, causing out of control spending on medications. We didn't choose to win the lottery and have a rare disease. It was given to us, and now we have to make the best of it. And thankfully, there's modern science that can be innovative enough to find drugs that will allow patients with rare diseases to have a better quality of life, an acceptable quality of life, and to live as normal a life as possible with the conditions that they were handed. It's not our fault, and really the government has to support us and not just look on costs. So what's going to be the impact? On August 4th, our organization made a submission in response to the consultation underway regarding the proposed amendments to the regulations governing the PMPRB. And we expressed concern that the health of Canadians living with PNH continues to be put at risk by the uncertainty generated by the PMPRB process. In undertaking the significant overhaul of the PMPRB, the fine balance between the cost and effectiveness of drugs, especially those for rare diseases, has been disrupted. The process of reforming the PMPR is already having a quantifiable and detrimental, if not deadly, effect on patients' lives. Let me bring this to reality. Many, if not most or all patients living with PNH have heard there's a new treatment out there made by the same pharmaceutical company, except instead of getting an infusion every 2 weeks, you're getting an infusion every 2 months. Can you imagine that? Every 2 months instead of every 2 weeks. So if you have to miss school or miss work a half a day every 2 weeks, now you can be present and do your daily activities and only have to miss school or work or whatever every 2 months. The price has publicly been published by the drug company that it's 10% less than Solaris. Look at the cost savings for the drug company who's paying for the infusion costs, which they, I'm sure, will pass on to the payers. But you're now looking at 6 less infusions per cycle, 6 cycles a year. That's 18 less infusions, maybe 19 if you, because of the 52 weeks versus 12 months type of thing. I haven't really done the arithmetic, but it's let's say 18 infusions. That each infusion has to cost over $1,000 an infusion. Multiply that by the number of patients, and to the company's own admission that when Ultomiris was approved, and it's approved and out in the market for almost 3 years now in the US, in Europe, just last week approved in the UK and in Japan, that in the first year, 70% of patients on Solaris opted to switch to Ultomiris. So if we go by that formula, and I'm guesstimating, I don't have the real numbers because it's confidential and the drug company doesn't share it, but I'm guesstimating that there's around 300 patients on treatment in Canada. At 70%, that's a little over 200. At the cost savings for infusions, we're looking at $3 to $4 million of cost savings. That's a lot of money. But you want to know something? Even though Health Canada approved Ultomiris several years ago, the company has suspended their pricing applications because of all the regulations and all the politics that are going on with CADIF and the PMPRB. That's reality, and that's affecting patients with PNH today. Not maybe, but today. This is reality. I'm involved with ongoing discussions to how to get everybody to the table to see how we can get this processed. And hopefully we'll be able to get it fast-tracked, because there's no reason why patients should have to wait another 2-3 years to be able to get a medication that is improved, has proven successful in elsewhere in the world. Let me give you another example. In 2019, the drug company did $339 million of revenue with this drug. In 2020, they did $1.1 billion of revenue. That's because the drug is effective. That's because doctors are prescribing it. They're seeing the benefit in the quality of life to their patients. And it's basically the same molecule. If you're doing well on Solaris, you're going to do well on Ultomiris. Okay, so that's what's happening here in Canada, and that's real time. That's not maybe, that's not what if. This is real time. There are currently 18 molecules being studied in PNH around the world. And only one study had clinical trials or has clinical trials still ongoing in Canada. After their phase 3 trial and before it went into the extension trial last summer, the results were very good. Okay, I won't elaborate on that. It's all public information, but hemoglobin improved, LDH dropped, bilirubin dropped, reticular counts dropped. Everything was great. Okay, patients who are transfusion dependent for several years now, since they started the drug, have not had the requirement for a transfusion. When they announced their top line results this past February, they went out for application to the FDA, the Federal Drug Administration in the United States, to get it commercialized. They did the same thing with EMA, the European Medicines Association, and they went to Australia. You ask, why Australia? Well, Australia has a program for drugs for rare diseases, and it'll be approved there in months and not years, versus Canada is going to take years to do. The company has publicly announced that they're hoping to get FDA approvals to commercialize sometime next month. So from the end of February to May, that was the process to get the drug approved to be commercialized so doctors could prescribe it in the United States. That drug, AMAC was told, maybe will be approved by 2023. That's almost 2 years away. And that's assuming everything goes without a hiccup. So 2 years, say maybe 3 years, maybe more. That's where Canada stands in the ranking to the rest of the countries around the world. And the reason for that is that Canada is just not a pharma-friendly country. So drug companies are going elsewhere. And the ones that are staying here, thankfully there are some staying here, they are made to jump through the regulatory hoops like there's no tomorrow. And eventually the drug companies just throw up their hands and say, we'll go elsewhere. So this is what we're faced with. None of the companies leading drug development in PNH, even those in phase 3, have confirmed if and when Canada will be included in their global launch plans. Last year, almost half, 42% of the new drug launches in Canada were delayed for 6+ months following Health Canada approval, or not launched here at all, compared to 22.5% in 2018 and 2019. So the drug companies are seeing the writing on the wall, and they're starting now to go elsewhere. I'm sorry not to bring you glad tidings today, but this is reality, and this is what we're faced with. Going to Health Canada to make them make changes. I mean, they decide to what drugs are going to be approved in Canada, what they're going to pay, but then they hand it over to the provinces, and the provinces get the irony of our frustration because they can't provide their constituents with the drugs that they really want, because they don't have the money to pay for it, because the drugs just aren't being priced properly. That's all the bad news. Now, what do we do about it? We patient organizations in Canada, we have to advocate. We have to make our voices heard. I told you earlier that politicians go by votes. And unless you speak up and there's a threat that they may not get reelected, they're not going to make any changes. So in October of 2020, 6 months or so ago, we launched an advocacy campaign to urge the government of Canada to put a stop to the PMPRB reform. It was a multi-pronged approach. E-advocacy, we targeted the Prime Minister, the Minister of Health, the Minister of Innovation, Science and Economic, who's responsible for the PMPRB. Imagine that. This guy is responsible for business and has nothing to do with the Prime Minister or the Health Minister. Go figure that one out. We sent emails and through our social media. We had virtual meetings with provincial and federal elected members to speak out against the proposed changes. We had media interviews. We had Canadian Association, PNH Canadian Association patients. We had spokespeople in Calgary and Montreal who spoke with the media and were interviewed on radio shows in conjunction with some of the members of Parliament. We had only 3 months to make changes to the PMPRB regulations that were scheduled to come into play in January 1 of this year. This was the blank page on our website, and this was a countdown clock. Our voice was heard. We engaged with 172 federal and provincial government decision makers, federal representatives, and party leaders. We sent out, being a little modest here, 30,000 emails. It was closer to 33,000 emails hit Justin Trudeau's desk. Over 5,000 Facebook and Twitter tweets went out to the federal members of Parliament. We were on, as I mentioned, radio, TV, print, online, social medias. Our voice was heard. December 30th, the PMPRB regulations were delayed until July 1st. So that gives us another couple of months to make sure that our voices are heard. And we're counting on you, because if you don't do it, it's not going to get done. There's a coalition of about 15 or so patient organizations that have a campaign that are running Protect Our Access. Your access to the best medicines are at risk. You have to tell the politicians, because if they don't hear you, they're going to do what they want. Our voices need to be heard. Kimberly will post the access, the web link to protectouraccess.ca, where it's real simple. Just click on it, type in your name, your postal code, click send, and an email will go to the decision makers. But it's not just you. Please circulate it to your network. to your friends, to your family, to your caregivers, to your loved ones, your schoolmates, anybody that will listen. Get the word out and have them send the emails. The politicians need to get the message. And if they get the message, hopefully July 1st will be kicked down the road until January 2022. It's only you that can help make the difference. Thank you, and thank you for your support. And Kimberly, if there's any questions.
Thank you, Barry. That was really great. It was very eye-opening, and I appreciate that you didn't try to protect us from the truth on that one.
Sorry.
No, it's what needs to be done. It's good because it's so important to know what's happening. And I think, like you said, there's a lot of questions right now around, well, why, like you really tied it to the COVID vaccine very well. Why are we not getting access to the vaccines like some other countries are? So I really like how you tied those two together. It really paints the picture.
Thank you. Well, as I said, it's a silver lining because now people understand what patients for rare diseases go through on a daily basis. Not getting access to vaccines in Canada is affecting each and every Canadian.
Right, right. So we get to
Yeah.
step into the shoes of a patient with rare disease, what they face every day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If there's
Yeah, we have a couple questions.
Sure.
And I did put the protectouraccess.ca into the chat. So folks, if you didn't catch it from the presentation there, that's the direct link. If you want to go and make your voice heard, please do that. So the question, Barry, will there be more interest in listening to us with the potential of an upcoming election? You and I were just talking about this before we came online. Should we speak with our MPs in our riding?
Most definitely. I believe on the Protect Your Access, it'll automatically go to your MP from
Right.
your postal code. But if you want to take, or the patients listening in want to take the initiative, you have to remember one thing. These MPs work for you. They are paid to listen to you. And if you ask for a meeting, I would be shocked if they don't grant it to you.
Especially
So,
if you are a patient, if you're a rare disease patient, would that be a really important feature to
yeah,
pass along?
and even if you're not, if you're a family member, if you're a
Mhm.
caregiver, I mean, reach out to your federal MPs. This is definite, whether they're in power or they're in the opposition. They have to know what their constituents think. And the more noise, if you want to call it that they hear from their constituents, the more they're going to bring it up in the caucus meetings. That's the only way we're going to get things done. So yes, if you want to reach out to your MP, by most means, do so.
Great. And so I think what you're saying is we can do that through the protect our access.ca, or if you aren't sure, most of I think every MP has a website. You can always find them that way and target them by email or social media that way as well.
And even if many people don't know who their MP is, you just have to Google who's the MP, federal MP for whatever the postal code is, and it'll come up.
Perfect. Barry, what do you think? Do you think it would also help for Canada to rebuild its drug manufacturing abilities?
The pharma industry is very interested in coming to the table. We wrote a letter a couple of months ago, which the Prime Minister answered, and he kicked the ball into the health minister's court and said she would get back to me. And that's a couple of months ago, and she still hasn't got back to me. But the pharma industry, IMC, Innovative Medicines Canada, made a proposal to the government whereby over the next number of years they were prepared and they articulated the investment of X billions of dollars over the next number of years. And it was very well articulated. They sent it to the Prime Minister and the Health Minister. Lo and behold, it was never even responded to. It was like the letter went into cyberspace, lost. So I wrote a letter saying, hey, they wrote you, you never answered. Why? That's what's going on. They're just ignoring the issue. So to answer your question, the pharmaceutical industry is very interested in coming back and to rebuilding their R&D and manufacturing capabilities in this country. 100%.
Okay, that will be great. I see one last question here. It's from Michael. Michael's asking about the COVID vaccine. So Michael's asking if we have an idea of how many PNH patients have been vaccinated, what kind of vaccine did they get, and are there any serious side effects? I don't think, Michael, that we could answer those specific questions, but I know that on our AMAC website, Michael, if you want information about the vaccine, we have a section there. But I would probably advise you to speak with your hematologist, your physician. Every patient is so unique, so it would be good to talk to them if you're having some hesitancy about receiving the vaccine. Now, Barry, I know that you are a PNH patient and you have had the vaccine. Do you?
I've had 2 shots of Moderna. I've had relatively no. At first shot, I had a sore arm, which is typical after I get a vaccine of whatever sorts. The second vaccination, I was out of sorts a little bit, just kind of foggy, phasey the day after. But by that evening, light switch came on and I was fine. My wife, who's not a patient, had similar situations. So I think everybody is different. But if you go on the website of the Canadian PNH Network, this is a group of, and I know you're aware of them, PNH specialists across the country. And when you go on their website, pops up straight in your face, you don't have to click anything else, is the PNH Network. These are all hematologists across the country, their position on being vaccinated. Just for your background, and again, as you suggested, Kimberly, speak with your own doctor, and if your if the doctor is not part of the network, or if they are part of the network, they were part of putting together this analysis. But like you said, every patient is different, and you really have to speak with your hematologist to see, if you can or cannot get it and what they think.
Yeah. I just see one last question pop in, Barry. I'm just going to read it. Our goal is to stop changes to drug pricing regulations. Is that right? If so, should I talk to others?
Others meaning what?
I'm not sure, Michael, if you keep typing in there. By others, I'm wondering if you're meaning other patients, or we were talking about members of parliament. I'm not sure. I'm just going to see if, Michael, if you want to type in a little bit more about what the others are. But yes, you're right. The idea is that we want to, and Barry, you can speak to this, that we want to stop what the changes that may go through on July 1st.
Correct. Why make the changes? Everything's working now. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. The prices, the changes that they're making will just degrade the situation from what it is. And it's not perfect now, but it's certainly not broken. We're getting the drugs that we need. We just want to make sure that, the new changes don't hinder the pipeline. Right. So yes, that answers your question. I hope.
I think so. I'm not seeing anything else come through. Michael, I hope that answered your question. If you have follow-ups on that, please just let us know. So yeah, so with that, I think we'll wrap up. Thank you so much, Barry. I really appreciate your talk today. If you need to go back and look at anything that Barry covered today, again, this has been recorded and it will be available on our website following the presentation. Please, if you can, go to protectouraccess.ca and let them hear your voice. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great day and stay safe.
Thank you.